In the chaos of the Korean War, a young South Korean soldier broke the single most important rule. He fell in love with an American nurse. Their secret marriage lasted just 42 days before the front lines swallowed him whole. She was shipped home, believing him dead. He spent the next 50 years searching for a woman whose name he didn't even know. This is the true story of a love that survived a war and the decades-long fight to find it again. This is the story of Corporal Park Min-jun and Lieutenant Elena Clark. He was a South Korean infantryman pulled from university to fight. She was one of the first African-American Army nurses serving in an integrated unit. In the smoky haze of a field hospital, they forged a connection so powerful they were willing to risk everything for it. But in 1951, love between a Korean soldier and an American nurse wasn't just forbidden. It was an act of treason that would send them down two different roads for half a century. Min-jun was not supposed to be a soldier. In the spring of 1950, he was a literature student at Seoul National University, writing poetry about peacetime. Then on June 25th, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel. Within weeks, he was handed a rifle and a uniform, his textbooks traded for a helmet. By winter, he was shivering in a foxhole near the frozen Chosin Reservoir, one of the few survivors of his original unit. A piece of shrapnel in his leg sent him stumbling into the medical tent of the 8055th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, and that is where he saw her. Elena Clark had volunteered. She was 24, from Baltimore, a graduate of the Freedmen's Hospital School of Nursing. When President Truman desegregated the armed forces in 1948, it created a narrow door. Elena was among the first black women to walk through it, arriving in Busan in July of 1950 with 11 other nurses. The work was brutal, 18-hour shifts, treating wounds that defied imagination. But for Elena, it was also a perverse freedom, a chance to be judged by her skill, not her skin, for the first time in her life. She was cleaning instruments when the injured Korean corporal was carried in. Their eyes met over a sterilizer, he in too much pain to be shy, she too tired to look away. She later said it was the quiet in him she noticed first, a stillness amidst the screaming. He spoke a little English, learned from missionaries. She knew no Korean. Their first real conversation was through a pad of paper, passing drawings back and forth. He drew a map of his hometown, Jeonju. She drew the skyline of Baltimore. He pointed to her drawing, then to her, and said, "You miss." She nodded. He pointed to his own and said, "Same." For 3 weeks, as his leg healed, they found corners of time. A shared cigarette behind the supply tent. Him teaching her the Korean word for thank you, *감사합니다, her teaching him the lyrics to a Nat King Cole song. It was a connection built in the negative space of a war, a secret garden amid the ruins. But here's the thing about war, it makes the future feel like a fantasy. You either grasp at life fiercely or you surrender to the chaos. They grasped. Their secret wedding was held in a bomb-damaged church in Daegu, with only a sympathetic chaplain and 2 nurses from Elena's unit as witnesses. It was February 14, 1951. Min-jun gave her a ring fashioned from the copper wire of a field telephone. She gave him her only photo from home, writing on the back, "To my husband, find me." They had 42 days. 42 days of stolen hours, of plans whispered about a life after the war, in America, in Korea, anywhere they could be together. But the military had a term for what they were doing: fraternization. For a Korean soldier and an American nurse, it was more than a breach of protocol. It was a geopolitical scandal waiting to happen. The pressure came from both sides. Elena's commanding officer, a colonel who believed in separate but equal, began questioning why she was spending so much time in the convalescent ward. Min-jun's unit was being reassigned to a brutal push near the Iron Triangle. They applied for permission to marry officially. It was denied. Flatly, the reason given: operational security. The unspoken reason: the image of an African-American woman and a Korean man as a married couple was, to the powers of both armies, an unacceptable complication. They made a desperate plan. Min-jun would finish his tour. Elena would complete her rotation in 8 months. They would meet in Seoul at the base of the Bosinggak Bell Pavilion on the 1st of October. If that failed, they would meet the 1st of every month thereafter until they found each other. It was a promise made on a thread of hope. Then, the war tore it. In late March, Min Jun's unit was ordered to advance under heavy artillery fire. The night before he left, he slipped a note into Alina's medical kit. It read, "Do not believe them if they say I am dead. I will find you, I swear it." The next morning, he was gone. 2 days later, Alina was abruptly transferred to a hospital ship anchored off Incheon, a standard rotation. She never got to say goodbye. She was 7 weeks pregnant. Alone on that ship, the reality crashed down. She wrote letters, dozens of them, to his unit, to the South Korean Military Records Office. They all vanished into the bureaucratic fog of war. By the time she was discharged and sent back to the United States in late '51, she was showing. She arrived in Baltimore with a wedding ring made of copper wire, a photo, and a child growing inside her. Her family, rigidly religious and deeply ashamed of an unwed, pregnant daughter, and a mixed-race child at that, gave her a choice: give the baby up or leave. She left. She settled in Chicago, finding work as a nurse in a crowded public hospital. She told no one about Min Jun. It was easier, safer, to say the father was a soldier who died bravely, a simpler story for a complicated world. She gave birth to a son, James, in October 1951. And every first of the month, she would look at the clock and wonder if a young Korean soldier was waiting under Bell Pavilion halfway across the world. Meanwhile, Min Jun was fighting for his life. His unit was overrun. In the confusion, he was listed as missing in action, presumed dead. He spent 8 months in a North Korean prisoner of war camp, surviving on rotten potatoes and hope. When he was finally repatriated in a prisoner exchange in late '52, he was a ghost, malnourished, tubercular, but alive. The first thing he did was go to Seoul. He went to the Bosinggak Bell Pavilion on the 1st of October. No one was there. He told himself she was delayed. He went back the 1st of November and December. He asked every American officer he could find about Nurse Alina Clark. No record. She had vanished as completely as if she had been erased. He was discharged, a war hero with a busted lung and a broken heart. He returned to Jeonju, to family who wept with joy to see him alive. They arranged a marriage for him 2 years later to a kind woman from a good family. It was what was expected. He said yes, because what else was there? He had a son, then a daughter. He built a life, a good one on the surface. He became a teacher. But every year, on February 14th, he would take out a faded photo of a young black woman from Baltimore and whisper the English words he still remembered: "Find me." For 25 years, this was the stillness. 2 lives lived in parallel, separated by an ocean and a wall of silence. Alina raised James, who became a doctor. She never married. Min Jun raised his family, a dutiful husband and father nursing a private grief. The Korean War faded from headlines, replaced by new conflicts. But in 1973, something happened that would change everything. A law was passed in the United States, the Freedom of Information Act. And for the first time, Alina Clark, now in her late 40s, saw a sliver of light. She could request her own military records. She could maybe, just maybe, find a trail. She filed the paperwork, her hands trembling. Weeks turned to months. Finally, a thick envelope arrived from the National Personnel Records Center. She opened it, sifting through pay stubs and deployment orders. And there, buried in the appendix of a routine transfer memo from March 1951, she found it. A single line, a clerical notation that had survived the decades. It was the official denial of her marriage application to one Corporal Park Min Jun. It listed his serial number. Proof he had existed, their love had existed, and with a serial number, she could begin to search. At the very same time, on the other side of the world, Min Jun saw a television announcement that stopped his heart. The Korean broadcasting system was launching a monumental live program called Finding Dispersed Families. It was a direct appeal to a nation torn apart by war. For 453 hours, they would broadcast the names and faces of those searching for loved ones lost to the conflict. The window to apply was closing. His wife saw the look on his face. She knew his secret. She had always known. She put a hand on his and said, "You have to go for your peace." He applied that very day, submitting the name Alina Clark. He had nothing but her name and the memory of her face. 2 searches, now active, racing against the clock of mortality, on a collision course they could not yet see. But bureaucracy is a maze, and the past is a country with many missing signposts. Alina's letter to the South Korean Ministry of Defense came back, addressee unknown. Min Jun's application to KBS was one of 53,000. The odds were astronomical. Then in 1980, Elena's son James, now a surgeon, brought home a new tool, a personal computer. He told his mother, "We can try a new way." He connected to an early electronic bulletin board system used by military historians. He posted a simple query, searching for South Korean Army Corporal Park Min-jun, serial number 7294, possibly connected to U.S. Army nurse Elena Clark, 1951. The post sat there in the digital void for almost a year, until one day a reply pinged in from a user in Seoul. It was from a former clerk in the Korean Ministry of Veterans Affairs. The message read, "The name is familiar, I will check the archives." That was it. A thread no thicker than a filament of spider silk, but it was a thread. And in Jeonju, Min-jun, now in his 50s, suffered a massive heart attack. As he lay in a hospital bed, wires snaking from his chest, his son leaned in and said, "Father, you have to tell me who she is. Tell me everything so I can find her for you." With tears cutting paths through his weathered cheeks, Min-jun told the whole story for the first time. He gave his son the copper wire ring and the faded photo. "Find her," he whispered, "before I die." Two sons, one in America, one in Korea, now holding the fragments of the same shattered story. But time was the enemy they shared, and it was running out faster than anyone knew. The search began with a serial number and a copper ring. Two sons, on opposite sides of the planet, holding pieces of the same puzzle. In Chicago, James Clark, now a successful cardiac surgeon, approached his mother's quest with a scientist's precision. The reply from the Seoul bulletin board was a start, but it was digital smoke. He needed hard records. He filed formal requests with the U.S. Army Heritage Center, the National Archives, and even the United Nations Command Archives. Each reply was a lesson in frustration. Records from the Korean War were notoriously incomplete, scattered, or lost. The denial of marriage application was a clue, but it was a dead-end clue. It proved they tried. It didn't say where he was. James realized he had to think like a detective, not a doctor. His mother mentioned Min-jun was from Jeonju, the ancient capital. He found an English-language Korean newspaper in Los Angeles and paid for a small, awkwardly worded classified ad. Seeking information on Park Min-jun, Korean War veteran, possibly teacher, reward for contact. He included a post office box. For months, nothing. Then a single letter arrived, postmarked Seoul. The handwriting was shaky. It read in broken English, "Park Min-jun, common name, Jeonju many parks, need regiment, need birth date, need more." It was signed only with initials, KJ. It was another thread, thinner than the first. Meanwhile in Jeonju, Min-jun's son Park Jae-hoon faced a different maze. His father's health was precarious. The heart attack had left him weak. Jae-hoon was an engineer, a problem solver. His father had given him the photo and the ring. The photo was the key. He took it to a professional studio to be restored and copied. He then went to the local Veterans Association. The old men there, his father's contemporaries, clucked sympathetically. "An American nurse," one said, shaking his head. "Many soldiers had sweethearts, many promises. The war ate them all." They told him to try the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs in Seoul. It was a monolithic government building, a place where files went to die. Jae-hoon took a train to Seoul. He waited for 6 hours in a fluorescent-lit hallway before being seen by a junior clerk. He presented the photo, his father's discharge papers, the story. The clerk, a young man barely out of university, typed slowly into a computer. He shook his head. "No record of marriage to foreign national, no record of application." Jae-hoon insisted. There was an application. It was denied by the American side. The clerk gave him a look of profound bureaucratic fatigue. "If the Americans denied it, there is no Korean record. We only record what happened, not what did not happen." It was a door slammed shut. But Jae-hoon remembered the KBS program, Finding Dispersed Families. The live broadcast had ended years ago, but the archive was legendary. He went to the Korean Broadcasting System's headquarters. He was met with more sympathy, but also a sobering fact. The program had generated over 53,000 applications. They had reunited 10,000 families. The database was massive, but it was a database of seekers, not of the sort. Elena Clark's name was not in their logs as someone searching. She was a ghost on both ends. The producer he spoke to, a woman who had worked on the original broadcast, saw the despair on his face. She offered a piece of advice off the record. The army keeps its own personnel records separate from the ministry, and there are private researchers, men who specialize in finding people the war left behind. It is not cheap, and it is not always official. This was Jae-hoon's first major pivot. The official path was closed. He would have to go unofficial. He hired one of these researchers, a former military policeman named Kim. Kim's fee was substantial, but Jae-hoon paid it without telling his father. Kim worked with a network of contacts, retired clerks, archivists, even former intelligence officers. He warned Jae-hoon, the trail is 30 years cold, and if this woman went back to America and had a child, she would have changed her name. Clark is not a Korean name. It is a needle in a continent. Back in America, James encountered his own wall. He had hit the limit of paper. The next frontier was biological, DNA. In the early 1980s, commercial DNA testing for genealogy didn't exist, but paternity testing did for court cases. James had a radical, painful idea. He himself was the living link. His DNA was half his mother, half his father's. If he could find a relative of Park Min-jun, a sibling, a child, they could compare. But how do you find a relative of a man in Korea when you only have a name and a 30-year-old photo? You create a reason for them to find you. He convinced his mother to tell her story anonymously to a journalist friend at the Chicago Tribune. A human interest piece ran in the Sunday edition in the spring of 1984, a wartime promise, a lifetime of waiting. It described a Korean war nurse searching for the soldier she loved. It used pseudonyms, but included key truths: the field hospital, the secret wedding, the copper wire ring. James hoped the specific detail of the ring would be a beacon. The article was picked up by a small news wire. It ran in a few other American papers. And then something extraordinary happened. A Korean exchange student at Northwestern University saw it. He recognized the story, not the details, but the feeling. He had heard his own grandfather talk of a friend who searched for an American nurse. He sent a letter to the Tribune's editorial office, which forwarded it to James. The letter said, "This story is familiar. In my hometown, Jeonju, there is a respected teacher who never remarried after his wife died and who looks at an old American photo. His name is Park." The letter didn't give a full name, but it gave a location and a profession that matched. James felt a current of electricity he hadn't felt since his first successful surgery. This was it, a real, tangible lead. He booked a flight to Seoul. He told his mother he was going to a medical conference. He couldn't get her hopes up, not yet. He landed in a Seoul that was transforming, a city preparing for the Olympics, a world away from the rubble his parents had known. Through the exchange student, he was connected to a local reporter. The reporter agreed to help, intrigued by the romance of it. They took the train to Jeonju. James, a tall black man in a suit, stood out profoundly in the rural city. They went to the high school. They asked for Teacher Park. The secretary said, "We have 3 Teacher Parks. Which one?" James showed her the restored copy of the photo his mother had. The secretary's eyes widened. "Ah," she said, "that is Park Min-jun *Seonsim *. But he is not here. He is very ill. He had a heart attack. He is at home." The address she gave them was for a small, traditional house near the edge of town. James's heart was hammering. He was standing outside the gate, the reporter beside him trying to formulate what to say when the gate opened. A man in his early 30s with a kind, weary face stepped out. It was Jae-hoon. The two sons stood face to face, separated by a language barrier but united by a mission they didn't yet know they shared. James, in slow, careful English, said, "I am looking for Park Min-jun." "My mother, Elena Clark." He held out the photo. Jae-hoon's breath left his body. He looked at the photo, then at James's face. He saw his own father's eyes in this stranger's features. He understood everything in an instant. He said in Korean, "You are her son." He then reached into his pocket and pulled out his own copy of the same photo and the copper wire ring, now kept in a small velvet pouch. James stared at the ring. His mother had described it perfectly. The proof was in his hand. They didn't need words. Jae-hoon ushered them inside. In a small, sunlit room lying on a bed was Park Min-jun. He was frail, an oxygen tube under his nose, but his eyes were alert. Jae-hoon knelt beside him, speaking rapidly, softly in Korean. He showed his father the 2 photos, the ring. He pointed to James. Min-jun's gaze shifted from his son to the American stranger in his doorway. 30 years of hope compressed into a single moment. He whispered a name, Elena. James nodded, tears now streaming down his own face. Yes, Elena, my mother, she is alive. She is in Chicago. She never forgot you. He approached the bed. Minjun's hand, thin and lined, reached out. James took it. The old man's grip was surprisingly strong. He said, in the English he had preserved for decades, "Find me, you find me." It was a moment of breathtaking victory. The search was over. The lost was found. But here's the thing about finding someone after half a century. It's not an ending. It's the beginning of a much more complicated story. Because in that emotional, perfect moment in Jeonju, James made a promise. He said, "I will bring her to you. I will bring my mother here." He saw the light in Minjun's eyes, the decades of waiting finally rewarded. He called Chicago from Jae-hoon's house, his voice shaking with triumph. He told Elena, "Mom, I found him. He's alive. He's in Jeonju. He remembers." The sound that came from his mother, a sob of pure, unadulterated joy, was something he would carry for the rest of his life. She was ready. She would come immediately. Plans were made. Jae-hoon would prepare his father. James would return to America and accompany his mother back. It was settled. But as James boarded the plane back to Chicago, a slow, cold dread began to seep into his euphoria. He had been so focused on the finding, he hadn't considered the logistics of the reunion. Not the emotional logistics, but the legal ones, the bureaucratic ones, the cruel, real-world ones. His mother, Elena Clark, was an American citizen. Park Min-jun was a South Korean citizen. They had no marriage certificate that any government recognized. Their secret wedding had no legal standing. To the world, they were strangers, and South Korea in the 1980s had strict immigration controls. A visiting American tourist needed a visa. How would he explain an elderly black woman coming to stay indefinitely with a sick Korean man? What was her purpose for visit? Tourism. It wouldn't fly. Family reunion. She had no papers to prove it. Then came the second, more devastating pivot. Jae-hoon called him 2 days after he returned to Chicago. His voice was strained. "James," he said, "there is a problem, a big problem." While James was in the air, Jae-hoon had gone to the local district office to begin the process of documenting his father's long-lost family for any potential visa sponsorship. The clerk had asked for proof of relationship. Jae-hoon presented the photos, the ring, the story. The clerk, an older, stern woman, listened and then asked one simple, devastating question. What is the American woman's *Hojuj* number? The *Hojuj* was the Korean family registry system. Every Korean family was recorded in it, a legal tree of relationships. Elena Clark was not, and could never be, in the Park family registry. Without that, she had no legal standing as family. More than that, the clerk pointed out a deeper issue. Park Min-jun was legally married to another woman, Jae-hoon's mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. In the eyes of Korean law, that was his only marriage. The clerk's verdict was final. There is no official record of this earlier relationship. Therefore, it does not exist for immigration purposes. She can come as a tourist for 90 days. That is all. 90 days. After 50 years of separation, they were being offered 90 days. And even that was uncertain, as the immigration officer at the airport could still deny entry if her story seemed suspicious. Jae-hoon was shattered. His father, buoyed by impossible hope, was making plans, talking about showing Elena the ancient tombs of Silla, the sea at Busan. How do you tell a dying man that the love of his life is considered a tourist by his own country? James hung up the phone, the wall of bureaucracy now feeling higher and thicker than any wall of stone. He had found the man, but he could not bring his mother to him, not in any real, lasting way. The reunion they had dreamed of, a peaceful ending together, was being crushed by paperwork and Cold Warrior illegalities. He looked at his mother, who was happily packing a suitcase, folding a new dress she had bought for the occasion. She hummed an old Nat King Cole song. He had to tell her, he had to explain that the finish line they had just crossed was merely the edge of another, more complex maze. The clock was still ticking, louder than ever. Min-jun was fadding. 90 days might be all he had left, and getting her those 90 days was now a desperate new race against time. James stood in the doorway of his mother's room, watching her pack a lifetime of hope into a single suitcase. He told her. He laid out the cold, legal truth, the family registry, the 90-day tourist visa, the fact that in the eyes of Korean law, she and Min-jun had never been married at all. Elena Clark stopped folding the dress. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands in her lap. The joy didn't leave her face, it hardened into something else. Determination. 90 days is more than we've had in 33 years, she said, her voice quiet but iron steady. We'll take it, and then we'll figure out the rest. But James, the scientist, knew 90 days was a mirage. The stress of travel on a woman in her late 50s, the emotional tsunami of the reunion, the certain heartbreak of another separation, it could break her. And Min Jun might not survive her leaving. He needed a better solution. He called Jae-hoon back. We need a lawyer, James said, not a bureaucrat. A lawyer who understands international family law and isn't afraid of a fight. Jae-hoon found one. Attorney Lee was young, sharp, and worked for a firm in Seoul that sometimes handled cases for American military families. He listened to the story, examined the photos, the ring, the US military's denial of marriage application. He leaned back in his chair. The law is clear, he said, and the law is not on your side. However, he continued, the court of public opinion is a different matter. South Korea is changing. The world is watching because of the Olympics next year. This is a human rights story, a love story. If we cannot win through the front door of the Ministry of Justice, we must go through the window of the media. It was a risky gambit. Going public would expose both families to scrutiny, to judgment. Jae-hoon had to consider his own mother's memory, his father's reputation in their conservative town. James had to consider his mother's privacy. But Min Jun, when told of the plan, wrote a note in shaky handwriting. I have been hidden long enough. Let them see. So they orchestrated a quiet media leak. Attorney Lee gave the story, with full documentation, to a senior producer at MBC, one of the major networks. He pitched it not as a legal case, but as a lost chapter of Korean War history, a testament to the human cost of the conflict. The producer bit. A discreet camera crew was sent to Jeonju. They filmed Min Jun, oxygen tube in place, holding the copper ring. They filmed his tearful, halting account of the field hospital, the secret wedding, the promise. They then flew to Chicago and filmed Alina in her nurse's uniform, speaking with a dignity that silenced the room. She said, I am not asking for anything special. I am asking for the right to be with my husband before God calls one of us home. The paperwork got lost. Our love did not. The segment aired on a primetime news magazine in October 1985. It was titled The 42-Day Marriage. The effect was instantaneous. The switchboard at MBC lit up. Letters poured into the network, to the newspaper, to the Ministry of Justice. The public was captivated. Here was a story that transcended politics, a pure, aching narrative of love thwarted by war and red tape. Petitions began circulating. A few progressive members of the National Assembly took notice. For a week, it seemed the tide was turning. Attorney Lee used the public pressure to file an urgent humanitarian appeal with the Immigration Service, requesting a special long-term visa for Alina on compassionate grounds. They waited, and then the backlash hit. It came not from the government, but from the shadows. A conservative newspaper ran an op-ed titled Rewarding Lawlessness. It argued that granting special status based on a wartime liaison set a dangerous precedent, disrespecting the sanctity of Korea's family registry and the thousands of soldiers who had followed the rules. Worse, it questioned Alina's character, implying she was just another foreign woman seeking residency through a frail old man. Anonymous letters arrived at Jae-hoon's house, calling his father a traitor to his race, a disgrace to his first wife. The Ministry of Justice, feeling the heat from both sides, did what bureaucracies do: it delayed. They requested more evidence. They wanted affidavits from the long-dead chaplain, from the nurses who witnessed the wedding. They wanted Min Jun's POW records, his full military file. Each request was a month-long delay. Each delay was a nail in a coffin. Min Jun's health began a steep decline. The stress of hope, then the vitriol of the backlash, was too much. He was hospitalized again with pneumonia. Jae-hoon called James, his voice thick with despair. The doctor says, he says we are measuring time in weeks, not months. The 90 days you fought for, he may not have that many. James was in his Chicago office. He looked at the map on his wall. He had solved the puzzle of finding the man. He could not solve the puzzle of uniting him with the woman he loved. The walls were legal, cultural, temporal. He felt a profound, helpless rage. It was then that his secretary buzzed him. There's a man on line 2. He won't give his name. He says he was with the 8055th MASH. He says he has something you need to hear. James picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was old, gravelly, unmistakably American. "Dr. Clark, my name is Walter Briggs. I was an orderly at the 8055th. I saw your mother on TV, I knew her, and I knew Corporal Park." James's blood went cold. "What can you tell me?" he asked. Walter Briggs took a deep breath. "I can tell you they're asking for the wrong proof. They're asking for marriage papers, but in a war zone in 51, things weren't always written down, but sometimes they were stamped," he explained. When a soldier, American or Allied, received medical treatment, it was logged in a field medical record. Each entry was stamped with the date, the hospital number, and the attending medic's initials. "I was the one who logged Corporal Park's visit for a follow-up dressing change on February 15, 1951, the day after the secret wedding. And in the notes section," Walter Briggs said, "the nurse on duty, that was your mother, she wrote the reason for visit. She wrote, 'Routine check, patient in good spirits, celebrated anniversary yesterday.'" James's mind reeled. Celebrated anniversary yesterday. It was a piece of evidence they had never imagined. A contemporaneous record, written in the official flow of military paperwork, that implicitly confirmed a relationship of significance on February 14th. It wasn't a marriage license, but it was a footprint. "Where is this record?" James demanded. "That's the problem, son," Walter said. "My copy is long gone, but the master records, the US Army digitized a bunch of field medical records in the 70s. They're stored at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, but you need his exact service number, the date, and the hospital number to pull it." James had the service number, he had the date, but the hospital number, he called Jihoon in a frenzy. "Ask your father, the field hospital, did he have a tag, a card, anything with a number?" Minjun, drifting in and out of consciousness, couldn't remember. But Jihoon, searching through a box of his father's wartime effects they had never fully sorted, found it. A faded, yellowed card with Minjun's name, his Korean service number, and stamped at the top, 8055th MASH, Unit Log 731. James was on the next flight to St. Louis. The National Personnel Records Center was a fortress of file boxes. He submitted his request, citing the FOIA and waiving his mother's power of attorney. He waited for 2 agonizing days in a cheap hotel. When he was called back, an archivist handed him a microfiche sheet. There, in the spidery cursive of a young Elena Clark, was the entry. Date, February 15, 1951. Patient, Park Min-jun. Note, routine check. Patient in good spirits. Celebrated anniversary yesterday. It was real. He had it copied, certified, and notarized. This was their smoking gun. Not a denial of a marriage application, but an affirmation of an anniversary. He FedExed it to Attorney Lee in Seoul, who immediately submitted it to the ministry as new, critical evidence of a long-standing, committed relationship recognized even within military protocol. But the clock was now screaming. Min-jun had taken a turn. He was in the ICU, unresponsive. Jihoon's updates were hourly, each grimmer than the last. The ministry acknowledged receipt of the new evidence. They said they would convene a special review panel. They gave no timeline. James sat in his mother's living room in Chicago, the certified copy of the medical record on the table between them. Elena touched the photocopy of her own youthful handwriting. "I wrote that," she whispered, a sad smile on her face. "I was so happy that morning, I thought everyone should know." She looked at her son. "It's not enough, is it? Even with this, they will talk until he is gone." James knew she was right. The panel would talk, the bureaucracy would churn, Min-jun would die, and his mother's heart would break in a way that could never be mended. He had run out of legal moves. He had run out of media plays. He had one card left, and it was a desperate, dangerous, all-or-nothing gamble. It went against every instinct as a healer, as a planner, but it was the only play left on the board. He picked up the phone. He called Jihoon in the hospital waiting room. "Listen to me," James said, his voice low and urgent. "Forget the visa. Forget the ministry. How quickly can you get your father stable enough to travel? Not well, just stable enough to survive a long flight." There was a long silence on the Korean end of the line. "Travel, James, he is on a ventilator. He cannot travel." "He has to," James said. "We're not bringing her there. We're bringing him here, to America. We're going to do what we should have done from the start. We're going to bring him home. The plan was medically insane, legally precarious, and their only chance. Bringing a ventilator-dependent Korean man in his late 50s with a failing heart and pneumonia on a 15-hour flight across the Pacific was a recipe for disaster. James knew this better than anyone. He was a heart surgeon, but he was also a son. He called in every favor he had in the medical world. He arranged for a private air ambulance through a company that specialized in international medical evacuations. The cost was astronomical. James liquidated a chunk of his own investments without a second thought. Jae-hoon in Seoul fought the hospital administration for his father's discharge against medical advice. It was a brutal, painful negotiation. The head of the ICU told Jae-hoon he was signing his father's death warrant. Jae-hoon replied, "Staying here is a slower warrant. At least this way, he dies hopping." They assembled a traveling medical team, a critical care nurse, and a respiratory therapist from the air ambulance company. The paperwork was a nightmare. Min-jun needed a US medical visa, which ironically was easier to obtain than a spousal visa because the criteria were purely clinical. James filed it as an emergency medical transfer for treatment at his own hospital in Chicago. It was approved in 72 hours under humanitarian provisions. The system, which had blocked their love, now facilitated a medical mercy dash. On a cold, clear morning in November 1985, an ambulance transferred Min-jun from the hospital in Jeonju to Kimpo Airport in Seoul. He was sedated, stable, but frighteningly fragile. Jae-hoon boarded the air ambulance with him. The jet, a converted Learjet with full ICU equipment, took off into the dawn. James and Alina waited at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago in a private hangar, the Midwest wind howling outside. The flight was a 16-hour ordeal of constant monitoring, adjustments, and whispered prayers. James tracked it on a desk atlas, the tiny plane icon inching across the ocean. When the jet finally landed, taxied into the hangar, and the door opened, Alina Clark stood perfectly still. She watched as the medical team carefully lowered the stretcher. And there he was, not the young soldier from her memory, but an old, shrunken man, his eyes closed, tubes and wires connecting him to machines. Her hand went to her mouth. Jae-hoon stepped off the plane, exhausted, his eyes finding James's with a look of shared, shell-shocked relief. They had made it, alive. Min-jun was rushed by ambulance to James's hospital. He was admitted under James's care, a conflict of interest everyone chose to ignore. For 3 days he lingered in a twilight, his body battling the journey's toll. Alina never left the chair by his bedside. She talked to him. She told him about their son, about Chicago, about the life she'd built. She held the copper wire ring up for him to see. On the 4th morning, his eyes fluttered open. They found hers. No confusion. Just recognition, deep and absolute. He couldn't speak around the breathing tube, but he lifted a trembling hand. She took it. He squeezed. It was their reunion. No fanfare, no cameras, just 2 old hands clasped in a sterile hospital room, 34 years in the making. With aggressive treatment, Min-jun stabilized. He was weaned off the ventilator. His first whispered word was her name, Alina. His second was, "Sorry." She shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "You found me," she said, "just like you promised." But the legal clock was still ticking. The medical visa was for treatment, not for staying. Once discharged, he would have no status. James again had to find a solution. He consulted an immigration attorney in Chicago. The answer was startlingly simple and had been in front of them the whole time. "Marry him," the lawyer said. "Here in Illinois, get a marriage license, have a ceremony, then file for an adjustment of status for a spouse. The US recognizes marriages performed here. It doesn't matter what Korea's registry says." It was so obvious it was painful. The very thing denied to them in 1951 was now their legal salvation. But there was a catch. Min-jun had to be well enough to consent, to stand or sit for the ceremony, and to understand what he was doing. The hospital chaplain agreed to perform the service in the hospital's small chapel. It was arranged for a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after his arrival. Min-jun was in a wheelchair, dressed in a hospital gown and a blanket. Alina wore a simple blue dress. James and Jae-hoon stood as witnesses. The chaplain spoke simple words about love enduring all things. When he asked Min-jun if he took this woman to be his wife, Min-jun, in his still weak but clear voice, said, "I always have." The chaplain smiled and continued. They exchanged rings. Elena placed the original copper wire ring on his finger. It was far too small, so she tied it gently to a cord around his neck. She gave him a new gold band. He gave her a simple silver one Jae-hoon had bought that morning. They were pronounced husband and wife legally for the first time. The date was December 10th, 1985. James filed the immigration paperwork the next day. Minjun's recovery in Elena's small Chicago apartment was slow, but filled with a profound, quiet joy. He learned snippets of English. She learned more Korean. Jae-hoon stayed for a month, witnessing his father transform from a man waiting to die into a man content to live, however briefly. They had 5 months. 5 months of shared meals, of watching the snow fall, of James visiting with his family, of Minjun holding his grandson. They talked, finally, about everything, the lost years, the fear, the hope. They filled in the blanks for each other. It was a lifetime compressed into a season. Park Min-jun passed away peacefully in his sleep in April 1986, in the bed he shared with his wife, in the city she called home. He was buried in a cemetery in Chicago, under a stone that read, "Beloved husband and father, finally home." At the small funeral, Elena placed the original copper wire ring in his hand before the casket was closed. "So you have proof," she whispered, "when I find you next time." The story, however, had one final, surprising twist. A year after Minjun's death, a package arrived from Korea for Elena. It was from the Jeonju district office. Inside was an official document, stamped and sealed. It was a posthumous entry into the Park family registry, the Hojuj asterisk. After the media attention and the undeniable proof of their American marriage, a bureaucratic review had been completed. The document listed, for the first time in Korean legal history, spouse, Elena Clark Park, date of union, February 14, 1951, status, recognized. It had taken 35 years, a war, a search, and a death, but the Korean government had finally, officially, acknowledged what two young people in a field hospital had always known. They were family. Elena Clark lived another 15 years. She kept the document framed next to her wedding photo. She often told her grandson, "Never let anyone tell you what your story is. You write it yourself, one stubborn page at a time." She passed away in 2001. James and Jae-hoon remained close, brothers bound not by blood, but by a shared mission to mend a broken past. The love story of Park Min-jun and Elena Clark was not a fairy tale. It was a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be erased by paperwork, divided by borders, or silenced by time. It proved that some promises, even those whispered in the smoke of war, are stronger than armies, stronger than governments, stronger than decades of silence. They found each other. Against all odds, in the 11th hour of their lives, they found their way home. And that search, that relentless, decades-long fight against forgetting, changes everything we think we know about love, war, and the invisible threads that connect us across oceans and years. It demands we ask a final, urgent question. So what is that final, urgent question? It's this: how many other stories like this one are still waiting in the silence? Park Min-jun and Elena Clark were just two people, but the Korean War created millions of separations. Over 10 million families were divided by a border that was drawn in a day. Thousands of children were born of love and conflict, only to be lost to adoption, discrimination, or silence. Their story had an ending, however bittersweet. How many others do not? When we look at history, we see battles and treaties, generals and politicians. But the real history, the one that echoes through generations, is written in the hearts of ordinary people. It's written in the promise of a soldier holding a copper ring, in the faith of a nurse writing "celebrated anniversary" on a medical chart, in the determination of two sons who refused to let their parents' love be a footnote. This story forces us to see war not as something that ends when the guns fall silent, but as something that lives on in the missing pieces of families, in the unanswered questions, in the quiet grief that spans decades. It shows us that the most powerful forces in the world are not always armies or governments. Sometimes they are memory and love, and the stubborn, beautiful refusal to forget. Min-jun and Elena's legacy isn't just a romance. It's a map for anyone searching for a lost piece of their own story. It proves that the search itself is an act of love, that every letter written, every record requested, every question asked is a defiance of oblivion. We tell these stories so that we remember not just the cost of conflict, but the incredible resilience of the human heart. We tell them to honor the search as much as the finding. Thank you for listening to the story of Park Min-jun and Alina Clark. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your own life, we want to hear about it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what resonates with you. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about hope that spans a lifetime, please share this with them. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you more real, powerful stories of love, loss, and the extraordinary journeys in between. By subscribing, you become part of a community that believes every story matters. Turn on notifications so you never miss one. Remember, some connections are written in history books, but the deepest ones are written in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, across years, against all odds. Keep searching, keep believing. We will see you in the next story.